This is being recorded, so it's your chance to bail out if you want.
All right, I'm out.
All right, see ya. So Mark R. LePage, this in front of you, let me scoot this up a little bit. That's all right. This is our Ball State ARCH ARCH620 class, pro practice. And so you can't see everybody on the screen. We don't have wide enough angle on the laptop, but there are 20 of us here, all different backgrounds, all different undergrads, all pursuing their Master of Architecture here at Ball State. And as you know, so Mark and I have known each other for a long time, so he knows this class a bit. Actually, He was one of our sharks last year, so you may see Mark as a shark for the final as well. The project is the same this year. We'll do the business plan and the Shark Tank at the end of the semester. And right now, what we're talking about, we're just at that big idea stage.
Great.
And they're all looking at me going, Jeff, why is this all so incredibly vague? We did a little brainstorming exercise earlier. Problems architecture can solve. We started to formulate teams. Started thinking about how we're going to structure our business going forward. So that's a little bit of background on where we are right now. And for all of the students, this is Mark LePage. He's the founder of EntreArchitect Academy. There's a blog, there's a podcast, there's the Academy, there's a Facebook group. There's a lot of things. He's also the co-founder of Gābl Technologies and Gābl Media, which, as I explained earlier, is a platform really for podcasts and for video series and who knows what to come for media relating to the built environment. So like I said, I've got a couple of podcasts on there. The show that I was telling you about earlier is called Context and Clarity. It's part of the Gābl Media Network. Practice Disrupted, which you all listened to week 1, I think. It's part of the Gābl Media Network. So there's a lot of really great media opportunities there on Gābl. But I wanted to bring Mark on here today, number one, or to us today, number one, because he created this thing called EntreArchitect. And that is really what we're talking about this semester, is entrepreneurship in architecture. Again, you could get to the end of the semester and say, you know what? I want to go find an internship in a firm, and I want to work in a traditional practice for my entire career. And I want to be an employee in a traditional firm for my entire career. And that would be perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you might say, hey, I want to do this idea that I've got, this thing that I've been working on all semester is something I want to continue to pursue. And it may mean that I take some sort of departure from the business of architecture. And in my mind, that would be fine as well. Right. But I think what we need to do is think critically about and understand how a business is developed, how a business is run, what goes into all this. Because again, if you want to be an employee, you'll be a better employee if you understand these things that we're going to go through this semester. If you want to start your own thing, put that in quotes, start your own thing, you're going to be a lot better off than a lot of generations before you if you understand some of these things that we're going to cover this semester. And we've talked about this, and Mark, you and I have talked about this a lot. The fact that, you know, when you went to architecture school, which was the same time I went to architecture school, last year, 2 years ago, even, up until now, our business is just not taught by and large in architecture schools. So my goal is we come out of this with some ideas, some proficiency, some realization of what the business of architecture really is. So, hi, Mark.
Hi. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing well.
I'm really excited about being here because I'm really excited about the next generation of architects, which are you guys. Because Jeff had mentioned that when we went to school, they didn't teach. None of the schools were teaching business at all. They had a professional practice class, but they didn't really have a business class. They didn't really teach business or entrepreneurism, and in fact, generations before us, it was looked down upon. You've probably heard about that in sort of the history of the architecture profession. The AIA and much of the profession looked at marketing and business, the business side of it, as sort of beneath architects, that architects were at a level that didn't need to do that. And that was pretty much at the very tail end when Jeff and I went to school. Jeff and I are sort of the bridge between that mindset and what's coming. And what's coming are you guys, who really were brought up on the internet. The internet's been a part of your life since you've been born, and you're also inherently, you have the understanding of what business is, and many of you are sort of inherently entrepreneurial because of what you see and what you've seen on the internet and what people have built on the internet, and the tools that are available to us on the internet. And so Jeff and I are sort of that bridge generation between the way it was and the way it will be. And so I'm really excited about that idea of what architecture will become in the future, where Jeff has mentioned that you could have the idea that you become an architect and work for a large firm and be sort of the traditional architect. But today we have so many opportunities to do things beyond that if you choose to, right? The world needs more architects. Architects are the ones that build the world. We are problem solvers. We are the ones that create the solutions to many of the big, giant global problems that we're all facing. We are designers and we are problem solvers. And so EntreArchitect was created with the idea that architects need to understand better business, right? In order to be more successful individually, we have to understand how businesses work. And whether you're working in a large firm as an employee or whether you're starting your own business, the understanding of how business fundamentals work, at a very basic level, how does cash flow work? How does marketing work? How does branding work? How does sales systems work? To understand that will help you, for one, if you start your own business, to be successful. And if you become an employee, you become a better employee. You earn more money because you become more valuable to the people that you're working for. And so understanding business and entrepreneurism is critical in my mind, because as individual architects become more financially successful, which is very, very likely and possible if you understand business. We're small businesses. When we each individually become more successful as individual architects, the entire profession gets stronger. The entire profession grows. And I look at it, that's why my mission is EntreArchitect, at EntreArchitect, to teach individual architects to be more successful, is because that's my way of making the world a better place. Because if we can make each individual architect more successful, then the profession thrives and the world benefits from the work that we do. And so that's a little bit about the big idea that I had 8 or 9 years ago when EntreArchitect was launched in 2012. And then Gābl Media, again, was another big opportunity that I saw and decided to pursue another big idea. And so I'd love to have that conversation with you.
That's a great segue into the conversation, because like I said, I mean, tonight is the big, quote unquote, the big idea. So we spent a little bit of time up on the whiteboards, what are problems that architecture can solve. So I forgot to take pictures of the whiteboard. I've got to go back and take pictures of the whiteboard. But we have these huge lists, as you can imagine, of all the problems and all these solutions and different ideas. And now, like I said, we're forming teams or individuals to pursue these. So when you started EntreArchitect, you, like you said, you saw a problem. When you started Gābl Media, or Gābl, I'm going to call it Gābl Media. Yeah, call it Gābl Media. You saw a problem. So tell us again what the problem was for EntreArchitect, and then we'll move over to Gābl Media and talk about that problem.
I'll give you a little bit of an origin story. I am a licensed architect. My wife is also a licensed architect, and we started our own residential architecture firm in 1999. And I joke that together we make the perfect architect, because Anne-Marie is a traditional architect who loves design and loves to create things, and she hates business. And a lot of architects are like that. They just want to go and design. But I love business. I love the game of business. I love that there are rules in business, and that if you get good at those rules, you can succeed and you can win. And so together we became very successful. And because I had this interest in business, I started writing a blog in 2007. And actually, I started a blog in 2006 for my architecture firm as a marketing experiment, which worked really well. And then in 2007, I launched another blog called Entrepreneur Architect. And I just used it as my own little place to, when I did research about business or found a link or a cool website, I would put it on this blog that I had created. And at the time, like Jeff said, there was nothing about business in architecture at all, anywhere. Even the AIA wasn't talking about business in architecture. And so there was a big void on the internet for information about business, specifically for architects, and even more specifically for small firm architects like myself. And so this blog was just my own little personal passion project. And because there was this void on the internet, that blog very quickly found an audience. Lots of other small firm architects looking for information on the internet found that blog. And every week I would write another blog post, and in the comments, this little community formed. A bunch of architects started following what I was writing, and they would comment on what I wrote. And that community started to grow. And then that community encouraged me after several years to turn it into something bigger, to turn it into more than just a blog. And after many years of procrastinating and fear getting in the way of launching it into something bigger, I finally realized that I needed to do it and turn it into a bigger thing, to turn it into a platform for small firms to learn business. And what I did is I set it up as something that I needed to be accountable to. And so what I did, it was the end of 2012. I realized that December 12th, 2012 was coming up, which I really thought was cool. It was 12-12-12. And I wrote on the blog a blog post. It's there today if you even search for it, if you look for the 12-12-12 project. And I announced that I was going to do something life-changing for myself, and I was going to start something that would impact the world in a positive way. And I encouraged the people who were following me on the blog to do something similar. And I didn't tell anybody what it was. I just said, I'm doing this and I want you to do it too. And so I put it out there and said, I'm going to do something big. And that's what I did on December 12th, 2012. And actually at 12:12 p.m., I launched EntreArchitect.com, and I launched the EntreArchitect podcast the same day at that same time. And that was the beginning of it. I set a deadline. I put it out there, so I was held accountable to it. After many years of procrastinating and letting fear get in the way of starting it, because it was a big idea, because right from the beginning, the idea was to change the world through this, to be able to help architects be more successful, because I really felt that if we could be more successful, we'd be more powerful. And so I launched the podcast and the blog that same day. And that's how EntreArchitect started. And now EntreArchitect has probably about a community of 50,000 architects across the whole world It's a global community. We have a private Facebook group with more than 7,300 architects, all architects. You have to be an architect or an architecture student to join the group, so you're all welcome to join us. And it's a super engaged community. It's a very helpful community as we share and support one another, which is also sort of different than the way that the profession has been traditionally. Traditionally, architects have been very secretive about their success and how they became successful. They would hoard that information and not share it with one another. And when I built EntreArchitect and I launched the groups, it was part of the culture of the DNA of what EntreArchitect was for architects to share their knowledge with one another openly and honestly and transparently, so we can all thrive, right? If we all sort of help one another, we all grow together, and then the profession grows with it. And so that's EntreArchitect. Today, it's a membership site where you can join for training. We have 15 mastermind peer groups. We have courses and workshops that Jeff and I collaborate on. We have 3 podcasts, EntreArchitect podcast and the 2 podcasts that Jeff does. And then in 2020, January 2020, EntreArchitect continued to grow. The podcast continued to grow. And Jeff and I were collaborating, and we had launched the Build Your Brand workshop, which was a workshop for architects to learn about branding. And that was very successful. And so together we decided that there was an opportunity here to continue that brand of Build Your Brand, and to create something more to get architects more interested and involved in the branding and marketing of their firms. And so I asked Jeff if he wanted to create a podcast called Build Your Brand. I hired a friend of ours, Demetrius Lynch, to work with Jeff to create that podcast. And I said, I want to create this podcast. I want you guys to go do it. And Jeff and Demetrius went off and created a really amazing podcast that the first season tracks Southwest Airlines and shares the history and the story of Southwest Airlines and how it started from the very beginning all the way through to today, and how it's become successful. And every episode, it shares the lesson about what Jeff is teaching about Southwest Airline and how architects can apply that lesson in their own firms. So every episode is a lesson based on a successful brand. That podcast became so successful, and the relationship among the 3 of us became so successful, we saw an opportunity to create something even bigger. And that's how Gābl Media was born. Gābl Media is a multimedia network for architects and engineers and construction pros to sort of leverage their knowledge, share their knowledge with the world. Many of the people who have podcasts on the network now are people who are already leaders in the profession. They've created platforms, either websites, or they have speaking careers. They may have courses, and they don't have a podcast. And so we partner with them to create podcasts or video channels on YouTube to be able to leverage their knowledge and share their knowledge with the rest of the world. And some of them are focused on sharing that knowledge with other architects, and some of them are sharing that knowledge with people who are building new homes or renovating homes. And so the plan with Gābl Media is to turn Gābl Media into a multi-million-dollar media company, starting with architects and engineers. And so another big idea that I think can change the world, I know can change the world by sharing the knowledge that architects have. And so 2 big ideas that I had, and decided to pursue them and to try to turn them into something that would impact the world.
I want to go back to a really small piece, a seemingly small piece.
Yeah.
Early in the story of EntreArchitect, because Matt had a question like this earlier. Matt said, raise your hand, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Matt said, okay, so we get this idea and we start doing research, and we find out that there's a company out there, there's a business out there that does this thing, right? That's using our idea. And I think what's really important about what Mark said in the beginning when he was talking about EntreArchitect is there's a lot of small businesses out there. There's ice cream shops and there's pet groomers and I don't know, pizza shops and whatever. I guess I'm stuck on pets and food. There are plenty of people that don't understand business. But what Mark said is, hey, there's architects, and there's a lot of architects out there. There's Genslers and HOKs and Ratios and Axis and Schmidt Associates and Guidon and whoever else in Indianapolis, right? Lots of firms out there. But Mark said, hey, there's architects, and there's small firm architects, and there's lack of business training, lack of business understanding. And so the idea, yeah, there's plenty of people out there teaching business. There's plenty of people out there sharing information about business, plenty of people sharing information about business for small business owners. And, you know, whatever all the iterations of this example are, but there's nobody sharing business training for small firm architects. And that's a really important idea. So, you know, with all the stuff that's up on the whiteboards over there, you could say, hey, here's this idea, but there's lots of people doing it. Okay, well, how do we narrow that down? How do we niche that down to something that maybe no one else is doing?
Yeah, or Jeff, even before you do that, what's great about the fact that there are other people doing it, hopefully they're doing it successfully, is that proves the market. It proves that there's actually a need for that there is a demand for that service that company those companies may be providing. And so that's the first good thing, is that if there's somebody out there already doing it, it means that there's a need for it and that there are people out there serving that. And so it's already proven that there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I guess if you get to the point where you've got this idea and there's not a single person in the world doing it, then we might wonder.
Check it. Yeah. and maybe that's a great thing, right? Because that's how things like Google were created, because there was nobody doing what Google was doing and how they did it when Google started. But there's also opportunities. Some of those opportunities, nobody's doing it because it's a terrible idea. And sometimes, nobody's doing it because nobody thought of it and it's a great idea. And so at that point, you have to start doing some testing and figuring out whether it's a good idea or not.
Yeah. That's a great point. And so hopefully, you can see from both of Mark's examples with both EntreArchitect and Gābl, it's just identifying a problem, right? Which is what we've been touching on. We're really starting to dig into it now, but there's a problem out there. If you really become aware of what's going on around you, what's going on in your life, things that are difficult, and this is my desire, is that at some point I brainwash you to the point that you become hyper aware of problems, and not to be in sort of a negative way, but to look for opportunities. Hey, I can't figure out how to do this, or I can't, I'm struggling with this. Oh, okay. That's not a problem. That's an opportunity. Is there a solution that we can develop for that? So I think, again, that's two origin stories there. EntreArchitect, Gābl Media, problems, very specific to small firms, and everything that is EntreArchitect, everything that is Gābl, the Academy side, the Facebook side, all the pieces of it continue to be focused on small firm architects, and that's important to understand as well.
Yeah, right? Both businesses are very niched down to a very small community in relative to the world, right? Billions of people in the world. Our community serves people who are interested in business, specifically architects who are interested in business, specifically small firm architects who are interested in business. And so it's niched down to the point where it's a very clear definition of who we serve and who we don't serve, right? Obviously, any architect can follow EntreArchitect, any architect can join EntreArchitect, but our target market, our ideal client, are small firm architects who are they're either running their own business or leading their business, leading a business. They don't necessarily have to own it, but they have to be running the business. That's our target market. And then the same thing with Gābl Media. Our market are people who want to share their knowledge, and so we've created this very easy way for architects to leverage what they've already built elsewhere, either on a platform or speaking, and be able to create podcast content or video content. And again, very, very niched community, speaking to a very niched community.
Yeah. Yes, those are two really good examples. And so as you think about your idea and start to develop this, one of the things I'll challenge you to do is always to narrow it down, niche it down. How tight can you get this? And I think one of the things that I might be famous for inside the EntreArchitect community is making people uncomfortable with how far I push them to niche down. And there's a purpose for that. It's going too far basically to find an answer, to find bedrock. I think that probably resonates around the room, right? How far can we go down, niche down? How deep can we go till we find the actual foundation and then build up from there? So I think Gābl and EntreArchitect are a couple of really good examples. Those origin stories.
That niching down, Jeff, also makes the development of the idea easier, because now you're not talking to the whole world. You're talking to a very specific person, right? So now you can develop that business for that very specific person who needs a very specific thing. So you can build a marketing system and a branding system and a sales system for a very specific person, rather than trying to sell your product or service to the entire world.
We might have just lost the microphone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So what Mark is talking about, there's an example that I use with clients and when we do challenges and workshops and things. And I'll use this example of a restaurant owner. So if a restaurant owner is the person you're going to serve, if they're going to be your client, how many restaurant owners are there in the world? I don't know, like 100 million restaurant owners. I don't know what that number is. We can't possibly serve 100 million restaurant owners. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it if we wanted to. So what if we say, okay, well, it's not all the restaurant owners in the world. It's only the restaurant owners in the United States. I don't know. We're down to like 10 million now or something. Still too many.
I just Googled it. There's 15 million restaurants in the world. There's 700,000 restaurants in the United States.
Okay, so we've got to start at 15 million for the world. What's it? How many in the United States?
15 million and 700,000.
All right, so 15 million. We go to the United States, we're 700,000. That's still too many. We've got to get down. Let's go to Indiana now. That's like 5,000. Still too many. Indianapolis. Okay, now we've got 500 restaurants. I'm making up numbers, obviously. That's still an awful lot of people, right? How do we know how to serve 500 people? Plus, we've got, what are the places that just open? Culver's, or we've got Basbo Pizza down on Mass Ave, or we've got the brewery across the street. All of these people fall into that category, right? It's too broad. Okay, so what if it's now Indianapolis non-chain restaurants, independent restaurants? Okay, now all of a sudden that dropped by a lot. McDonald's is gone. Hardee's is gone. Culver's is gone. All those are out. So now, I don't know, we've got a few hundred. Still a lot. Okay. Independent with one location. Believe it or not, that just eliminated about half to 2/3 of the restaurants in Indianapolis. So we're down to what, like 20 now? Not bad. But what if we say was it, independent, one location in Indianapolis that only had 20 seats. 20 seats in the entire restaurant. Now we're down to like 10. Okay? And that makes a lot of, when we're thinking about these as clients, that makes architects really uncomfortable. Jeff, I cannot build a practice on 10 potential clients. No, you can't. Truth, right? But I will guarantee that if you have a conversation with all 10 of those restaurant owners, which it's Tuesday night right now. You could have a conversation with all 10 of those restaurant owners before the end of this week. And if you have a conversation with all 10 of those restaurant owners by the end of the week about their business, their struggles as it relates to what you do, you will now know more about one location, 20 seat, Indianapolis only, whatever other factors I just left out. You'll know more about that business model than anybody else in the world because you now have the cumulative knowledge of talking to all 10 of those people this week. You'll know more than any one of those 10 knows because you've talked to all 10 of them. Now all of a sudden, you're the go-to person, go-to architect, go-to consultant, whatever your business model is, for those 10. Go ahead.
Go down that path. It's a problem. Narrow it down to such a
Yeah.
sustainable for
Right. Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't know if you could hear that, Mark, but he was talking about Shark Tank. Somebody had, it was cat wine, right?
Yeah.
Cat wine, right? And now all of a sudden there's like 3 people in the world, so that's not a sustainable business model. Totally agree with that. Absolutely a problem. But the great thing is, if we go back to the restaurant example, if you're the go-to person for let's just say architect, for those 10 restaurant owners, guess what happens? It's a small, tight-knit community of restaurant owners, independent restaurant owners, and restaurant owner B that hired you to solve some problem, they know all the other restaurant owners as well, right? It's their community. Same with breweries, same with a lot of little niches. They're talking to a restaurant owner that has 30 seats in 2 locations, right? So they're outside of that 10. And the 30-seat 2 location owner saying, you know what, we're really struggling with this thing. And now restaurant owner B that you already helped said, well, you need to talk to this architect because we had that exact same problem and they helped us solve that problem. So now you've gone so deep on those restaurant owners that they'll help you expand back out. What you're saying about the cat wine example is 100% true. It's 100% potential problem. So we do have to be careful that we don't get it to a point that's so narrow, so small that it's not viable. But if we're careful about that, if we do our research, you know, we're really focused on exactly who our ideal client and our niche is, then we can pivot when we need to. But okay, well, cat wine's a little bit too narrow. How about cat and dog wine? Yeah, it's probably still too narrow. How about cat and dog owners? I don't know. I mean, it gets pretty muddy at some point. But that is an excellent point. When we're talking about service models and things like that, we could probably niche down better because it's not a product. But we niche down to 3 people, right? Your services can be applied across a wider swath, maybe. But it's definitely a danger. Definitely a danger. We can't discount that at all. Yeah. So Martha, this question is, and I need to have you come up and speak in the mic next time. I keep forgetting, but his question is, how do you grow and expand out from the 10? Right. So Google has their core search, and now of course it's Alphabet, right? So they've got all the things that grow and come off of the core business model. So once you have reached that point of in my example, the 10 restaurant owners, how do you then grow and expand off of that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. As you were describing that process of niching down and talking to those 10 business owners, you're describing. I'm sure you'll get into this later in your class. You're describing the process of developing a brand. That when you start talking to those 10 business owners, you start to become known as the go-to person, the go-to architect for small 20-seat restaurants, right? And then so when somebody, like Jeff said, if somebody's looking for an architect for a 30-seat restaurant that has two locations, you're going to be the architect who is known to be designing small restaurants. And so that's how it starts to grow. And so those architects those restaurant owners talk to other restaurant owners. You start to build a brand around that. So your website starts talking about how you can solve problems for restaurant owners, that very specific restaurant owner. The story that you tell your clients and your customers and your potential employees and the contractors that work with you, they all understand who you are and what you do and who you do it for. So they start talking about who you do it for and why you do it for them. So by niching that down, you can start developing that very clear identification of who you are and what you do and who you do it for and who you don't do it for. And so you become, every time that a restaurant is going to be designed in the city of Indianapolis, you're the top of the list, which allows you to charge more. So now, because you're the go-to architect for restaurant design, and you become the desirable choice, now you are in demand. You can bring your fees higher than everybody else because you're the one that does that, as opposed to somebody who designs restaurants but also designs schools and also designs houses and also designs small office buildings. When that generalist is up against the expert, and the job is to design a specialty restaurant, who, even if you're a higher price, who's going to get that job? It's going to be the person who is the expert, right? Because you've built that brand around that very specific niche. And so that's how that starts to grow, because you have identified that very specific niche. That niche, the people that you're speaking with start evangelizing for you. They start talking about you. They start sharing the story that you've shared with them, and that starts to grow.
Yeah, and thinking specifically about your example, right? You grow and you want to go into hospitality, as a for instance. So think about, Hyatt is going to open a new hotel, or maybe they're remodeling a hotel here, and they want to redo the restaurant in the lobby of the hotel, which happens relatively often. They're going to look around, right? Hey, we want our hotel to be as local. Put that in quotes. We're a chain, but we want to have this local flavor. So they're going to look around Indianapolis at great local restaurants. Well, who designed this one? Who designed this one? The restaurant in the lobby of the Hyatt. I think that's the example I used. How's that for short-term memory? It might be 20 seats. Now we've got this correlation. We've got this architect that's designing all these little local one-off restaurants. Why don't we have them design you redesign the restaurant in the lobby of the Hyatt? Well, hey, you did a great job on that. We're gonna have this little kiosk thing, or we're gonna have this other piece in the lobby, and all of a sudden it can start snowballing into more and more pieces. So there's ways for that to branch out. What Mark is talking about, the brand, right? We're gonna develop this brand, which we will talk about later in the semester, but people are coming to you for this thing, for this restaurant, in this example. The great thing is you're starting to attract people. And then that expertise that Mark is talking about gives you some leverage. Get paid more than others that dabble in restaurants or also do restaurants or whatever. It also gives you the ability to say, yeah, I don't want to do that project, or I do want to do that project. Right? It gives you the benefit of choice, right? And so you could have developed your brand on that Indianapolis, one location, 20-seat restaurant, and you can build it from there. And someone comes to you and says, hey, we want to reimagine the brand of our chain that goes all up and down the East Coast. And you can say, well, no, I don't want to, because I'm really focused on, these small independent locations. Or you say, well, I might be interested in that if we can design each one of these in the chain as its own little independent local sort of location. You've got leverage at that point, potentially. So, and that's part of the beauty of building this brand and expertise that we're talking about. It's a great question, very serious questions. Who else has a question? Everything Mark has said.
I want to expand on that concept a little bit, Jeff. How many of you want to start your own firm eventually? So about half of you.
Half of them, yeah.
That concept, that strategy of becoming an expert and then becoming the go-to architect for that specific thing is a great way to differentiate yourself when you're starting your own firm. Because a lot of architects start their own firm and they become generalists. They do everything, right? Because you're so new and you have no reputation and you don't really have the network, and so you take whatever you can get, right? You put the word out there that you're an architect, and maybe you'll design a house, and maybe you'll design a dentist's office, and maybe you'll design somebody's deck, and you just sort of do everything, right? And a lot of architects start that way, and you can start that way, but you could also spend that time before you launch becoming an expert, doing the research to become an expert in something that you're really passionate about, something that you really care about, and become an expert on that. And then go through that exercise that Jeff explained. Find out who those people are who need those services, what you've become an expert in, how can you help solve some problems for very specific people. And even though you may be young and you may have just started this firm, because you're an expert, you have an opportunity to be perceived very differently than the generalists, right? No matter how many years they've been working. One of the things that happened with us when we started our architecture firm, when we were 29 years old when we started our architecture firm, and we had this great idea that we were going to be high-end residential architects. That was what we were going to do. And we started the firm in Westchester County, New York, which is just the county just above New York City. Very, very wealthy area, and with a lot of competition. And we didn't even think about that. We didn't even realize that. We weren't thinking business at that point, with business fundamentals and understanding what Jeff is talking about today. And we just decided, all right, we want to build a brand around high-end residential and start designing big, expensive homes. And we could do that. We were great at that. We could design great homes, but we were also competing with firms that have been around for 30 or 40 years with portfolios that were 4 inches thick. And we had no portfolio. We were 29 years old. We had no projects. And so we very rapidly learned that that's not a market that we can start in. And so we actually started doing the process of niching down. And what we ended up doing is we became the go-to architect for high-end small projects. And so we niched it down all the way down to, all right, we're going to still work for those high-end clients with those big houses, but we're just going to do these little tiny projects for them. So maybe we'll do a specialty kitchen, or we'll do a family room addition. but we'll do it in a very unique way or very highly detailed way. And we became very well known and built a great brand around designing these additions and alterations to these really expensive homes. And what that also did was there was a vacuum in that market, because the firms that were doing the big expensive houses didn't want to do that little work. And so there was this opportunity to find this little work in the same market as those big houses. And then as we became the expert in that, and we started growing our portfolio, those projects started getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And then we started designing some of those big expensive houses, because we started in this little niche. And so that's an opportunity to launch a firm by niching down to and becoming an expert, right? So you know more than everybody else in the market about that one very specific thing.
Great real life story. Question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so my question is, if you become an expert in a very specific thing, and then that thing becomes less popular, how do you kind of protect your business from completely going under?
Yeah, that's actually the fear of most architects, is if I niche down, then I reduce my opportunities. If it becomes unpopular, right? If that market goes away, then you have a problem, right? And so that's important to make sure that you're in a market that is thriving, that there is a demand for it, right? To become an expert in something that there's no demand will be a failure, right? So you have to make sure there are several additional steps that you need to take in order to make sure that the market is there. But you know, if you become that specialist in a very specific niche, and that niche goes away, then you're going to very rapidly have to, pivot. You're going to have to decide how you can expand that niche into something else. It is important to find a niche that there's a demand for, right? You can't just find a niche for the cat wine, right? It's just too small, or it's just irrelevant, or it's just there's just not enough market there for it. And so in our specific case, where we decided to do these additions and alterations, the opportunity was there. And the opportunity was always going to be there, right? Because that region of New York has a lot of very old homes. They all need to be renovated, every single one of them. Today, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, just south of Charlotte, North Carolina. Very, very different market. That market doesn't exist here, because all the homes that are here have been built within the last 10 years. They're brand new. And so you have to find a different market. And I believe there's going to be a very, very big market for renovations and improvements and repairs on these thousands of houses that are being built by these big developers, because they're not being built very well, right? And they have no character, and they have no soul. And so there's going to be a demand for an expert who can come in and solve some of the problems that the builders are not recognizing, or that as these homes start to deteriorate, because they're not built like older homes were built, where they exist to 100 or 150 years. Many of the houses that are in New York, in upstate above the city, these houses that are being built today in these big developments are not built to last 100 years. And so there's going to need to be some sort of remediation for these thousands and thousands of homes. There's a huge opportunity that's going to happen in that market, where all these homes are going to need to be renovated in 10 or 15 years. And if you become the expert in that market, where that's what you do, you can build a national brand of architecture that just does that one thing, just goes into these developments and renews these homes, that refreshes these homes and makes them new again. And so there's opportunities everywhere.
That's a really great question, an important question. And I'll give you a real quick
real life example. There's an architect in Boston named Justin Albert, and this really ties back to Mark's point earlier. Justin started out on his own a year and a half ago, maybe right before COVID, something like that. And he worked with a bunch of large firms on restaurant projects. And so this turns out my example and with the 10 people and Justin's example are actually coincidental, but pretty similar. He had developed this expertise working with these firms on restaurant projects. He decided to go out on his own and focus on chef-owned restaurants in Boston and Cambridge. And then COVID hit, and everything shut down. He's already built this brand. He's already built this expertise around this niche, basically. And he had already started to become the go-to architect for these types of projects. And one of the things that Justin explains is, because that's reality, right? When COVID hit, hospitality, firms that did hospitality work were crushed. If that's all you did, you were crushed. Mark and I know somebody that lost something like 12 projects in 18 hours or something. It's kind of a bloodbath. Same with restaurants and things like that they shut down, right? So what Justin said is, but the thing is, you've got the specialty, you're the go-to person for these restaurants. So a lot of these restaurant owners, especially chains and things like that, they may employ 5 or 6 architects. Guess what happens? Everything starts to shut down. They're still going to need an architect because they've got to figure out how to reopen, how to do something outside, how to have a pop-up stand, whatever. But they're going to shed 4 or 5 architects and keep the go-to. And so that's one of the ways that Justin survived, was having that specialty, that niche, being the go-to. Not and also does restaurants, or dabbles in restaurants, or whatever other version, but the go-to. That's what he credits his survival to. And I think that's realistic, because your question is a really good, really real. 2008, 2009. I mean, you guys don't remember that in a professional sense. That was horrific what happened, but there are some that survived because of specialties and niches and things like that. And others that, as Mark described, the generalist, I think I said this a week or 2 ago, there is not a single client that has ever asked for, nor will ever ask for, you to generally do something for them. Like, this is the big problem with generalists. You'll never say, hey, I generally need you to generally do something for me. Everybody has a specific request. I know we're kind of really close to the end of our time, so Matt, did you have a question?
Yeah, similar to that.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Opportunity to ask Mark maybe one more question. No? All right, we don't have any more questions, Mark.
I have a question.
Okay, what's your question?
How many of you have the big idea? Anybody have that big idea that is you're excited about it and you could? Yeah, I see one hand. A couple of iffies. Yeah, another one. Yep.
Yeah, there's a few that are half up too.
Yeah, that's exciting, right? It's you get really pumped about it. It's architecture is such an amazing profession, right? Because we can do everything from design a kitchen all the way to redesign, a global system, right? Because we're problem solvers. And so as we wrap things up here, I want to leave you with the idea that architecture isn't only about designing buildings. It's about problem solving. And if architects can come together in the future, which is one of the things I want to do with EntreArchitect, is crowdsource problem solving. If we can get thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of architect problem solvers to all focus their energy on one thing, right? One big global problem that we have, I think we can fix it, right? Because we're architects. We think differently. than the rest of the world thinks. And so with the spirit of the idea of the big idea could be a small idea that grows, or it can be a really big idea, and pursue some of those ideas. You don't have to dedicate your life to them or start businesses around them, but don't let the idea of something is too big stop you from pursuing that idea. Pursue it. And I would say that your biggest enemy is fear. You have to look at that fear and find ways to get through the fear, because on the other side is success. And that's the thing that stopped me for many, many years with EntreArchitect, is just the fear of starting it. And so if you have some of those big ideas and you think it could change the world, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I mean, we need, yes, like Mark said, the world needs more architects, right? And yes, that could be designing buildings, could be restaurants, or small additions, or whatever the projects are. But what about the spaces in between buildings?
Yeah.
What about policy? What about infrastructure? Right, we've got a huge problem in this country that we're facing right now with infrastructure. We need people in political circles. We need architects who are working with product manufacturers. Oh, that's great. You've got that idea for that new siding or whatever the heck it is that you're manufacturing. How does that work with building science? Like Mark said, some of these houses are going to, Mark, you used the word remediated, right?
Yeah.
Everybody know what remediated means, what remediation means? I mean, that's a pretty scary term. When we start talking about contract documents, if someone's talking about remediating one of your projects, you've got a problem, okay?
And in 10 or 15 years, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of problems because of the way these houses are being built. It's an opportunity for architects.
It absolutely is. And you can work on a very small scale, like Mark said. You can work on a very macro scale, micro or macro scale. Could be product manufacturers say, hey, this doesn't make much sense in terms of building science, but if you do this, or if you, something else, again, policy, could be local, could be global, could be anything. So again, that's part of this project as well. Make your idea as small as you want or as big as you want. Doesn't matter. We're gonna have a little bit of fun this semester exploring these things, and putting your problem-solving abilities to an idea. Right?
Don't let reality get in the way.
Yeah. We are going to whip through the business plan or business model canvas. We're going to make this project as real as we can in a limited amount of time, but we're also going to look for ways to overcome the hurdles of reality. We're not going to be limited, right? Our first thought is not going to be, okay, well, what's realistic here? Nah. We don't need to do that. Think first about what the possibilities are and work backwards from there. So that's great advice. Mark, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for sharing your story and your big ideas.
You're welcome. I was happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the Shark Tank to see what you guys come up with.
So Mark will be one of our sharks at the end of the semester. So you get a feel, right? He's not going to rip you to shreds. We'll introduce some more people later in the semester that might.
Have fun with it. This is an opportunity.
What kind of cookies are like?
This is an opportunity with this specific class, to explore some of those ideas that your architecture professors will not let you explore. You can think of those crazy ideas that you think could possibly happen if you just did this or you just did that. use that advantage. You have a professor here that's ready to let you dream big, and so go for it.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Soon.
All right, am I out? I'm out.
You're out. Thanks.
Good luck, guys. Bye.
All right. Anybody have any big takeaways from this conversation with Mark? Go ahead. Go for it. That's a big takeaway. Yeah. I mean, I think that is a really great takeaway. Macro, micro, that's a really great point. Yep. Yeah, that's a really great point.
There's things like finding who you serve almost kind of filters who you don't serve. You don't get stuck in that generalist, like, oh, I'll serve everybody. No, it's like, no, I know I can serve this person. No, not serve this person. You're not going to give the best.
Yeah, that's a super important point. And again, I make my clients, I make people that go through my courses, my workshops, and all that stuff. I purposefully make them nervous and uncomfortable because, and I may have said this in an earlier class, if you try to serve everybody, if you try to be everything to everybody, you'll be nothing to anyone. And there are so many firms that we want to be the generalist. I'm going to knock that a lot. But you're exactly right. If you know specifically who you're going to serve, who you serve best, how you serve them best, then you know who you should be serving, you know who you shouldn't be serving. And you can serve those people that you shouldn't be serving by helping them find someone else. And that's okay. Right? There are enough projects out there, there are enough clients out there for everybody. We need to do our best work for the right people. And then we can help other people find someone else to do their best work for them. That's a great point. Anybody else?